The horror genre has come an incredibly long way since the heyday of the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation. There's now so much variety and experimentation being brought to the table in new AAA releases that it's becoming quite hard to keep up. Just last year, we were treated to Outlast 2, Resident Evil 7, The Evil Within 2, and Prey, to name but a few. All of them exceptional games in their own right. Despite this, horror is by no means among the most popular of genres, and to most people it exists in that weird limbo between, I'm intrigued enough to give this a go, and oh god, why am I playing this? It serves to offer a quick thrill, a sense of safe danger, quote unquote, that you wouldn't normally get to experience, and it can achieve these aims quite easily through a number of different approaches. At the end of the day, it boils down to one simple thing. You want to know how bad it's going to be. It's really no wonder that this has become such a popular foundation for budding game developers. Steam will always be locked in a perpetual battle with the growing tide of low-effort horror games. Just because you make someone elicit a high-pitched, slightly embarrassing scream doesn't mean that you have succeeded in making a horror game. It just means that the player is going to get a noise complaint from next door. Now, if you can make someone feel generally uncomfortable and tense while playing your game, to the point where your whole body feels heavier by the time you're finished, then yeah, you've nailed it. It's getting it right and maintaining this consistent atmosphere that's the hard part, where most horror games fall at the first hurdle. Now let's dive into a game that absolutely delivers on all of these fronts. It's responsible for completely obliterating the nerves of its players and completely obliterating their mental well-being as well. In 2008, Visceral Games came out with one crazy good survival horror game, Dead Space. It made an impression on the genre very quickly and completely surpassed other entries, and deservedly so. Dead Space was an unusual blend of sci-fi horror featuring disturbing, twisted visuals, gold standard atmospheric sound design, and a deeply satisfying and innovative combat system. It was a truly memorable, wonderful addition to the horror genre, and everybody who has had the pleasure of playing it, even though pleasure isn't quite the right word, has a story to tell about it. Dead Space 2 came along shortly after. It was also a great success. It built on the foundation of its predecessor, gently changing things up by improving rather than attempting to reinvent the series. And then came along Dead Space 3, widely considered to be quite the divisive game in the series. The third installment decided to hold up a middle finger to the elements that made Dead Space such a memorable series, and veered off into its own direction. You can really feel how this game evolved from survival horror to action thriller, which many consider to be its biggest mistake. The sense of fear, the tension, the pants-wetting atmosphere just wasn't as apparent in this game. Instead, it favored overwhelming the player with waves of enemies. Instead of necromorphs sneaking around just waiting to scare the crap out of you, they would instead give you a headache with their loud and annoying screeches. Oh, and did we mention it's cooperative multiplayer? Now, this wasn't necessarily a bad move, it was actually implemented and executed pretty well. However, it does serve to highlight the direction that EA was moving in. Dead Space 3 was not a bad game. It was just significantly different from its roots, and sadly these very same roots were severed by EA shortly after with the closure of Visceral Games. Dead Space seemed to be, well, dead. Now E3 is once again so very close, and we're sure everyone is busy speculating, putting together theories about what will be unveiled and hastily hoarding loose cash in preparation for the inevitable wave of pre-order panic. To put it plain and simple, Dead Space is ripe for a comeback. For starters, the horror genre has evolved considerably since Dead Space 3. We can only imagine what horrific possibilities could be conjured up, as long as the series is given the respect it deserves. Perhaps EA could pull a Resident Evil 7 on us and completely change the existing formula while retaining the core of what made Dead Space such a successful game. There's also an odd whisper amongst fans of a VR release for the original Dead Space. That would be an interesting move for sure, but it's curious how well it would translate given its very cleverly implemented lack of HUD and third-person camera controls. Also, it would be terrifying and disgusting to face a necromorph up close and personal like that. Ugh. If Dead Space is to make a triumphant return, it should encompass a whole new story headed in a completely different direction. Isaac was certainly an interesting character in the Dead Space universe, but the ending to Dead Space 3 makes it feel like a story that was at its end. Dragging it on any further would just hurt the series more so. It's true as well that while Dead Space 3 was considered a divisive game, Dead Space as a new, fresh, and successful title suffered under its extensive media rehashes. Fans of Dead Space were forced to experience Dead Space Extraction, a rather bland and generic prequel rail shooter style game. Dead Space Ignition was a horribly received and quite bizarre action puzzle game. EA, why did you think this was something people wanted to play? There was even a mobile game for iOS and Android, a comic book series, and an animated movie. And we're sure you already know how those things went down. Dead Space burnt itself out, and now it needs time to rise from the smoldering pile of strange choices, big mistakes, and severed limbs. It needs to reinvent itself whilst maintaining its essence, creepy sci-fi horror and intense atmosphere design, paranoia, claustrophobia, fun action mechanics, its detailed wonderful story, and horrific foes. It needs to take all of these things into account and jump scare us out of nowhere with a fantastic reboot. Thinking about the graphical capability of a new Dead Space game powered and uplifted by today's latest hardware is enough to make most shift uneasily in their seats. Maybe the world isn't ready for 4K jump scares just yet, but it's also safe to assume that most would gladly be welcomed back into this fantastic game series, even if it is by the grasp of a large fleshy tendril dragging us by the ankle down a dark and foreboding corridor. Yes, that would be just splendid.